Everybody, this is Lewis Shine. Hey, I'm excited for this first session of July Defense Masterclass. We're going to get into some good things, so let's get started. So my background in defense, I had a very extraordinary year as a Division II acting head coach, where at that time I was 37 years old. I was an assistant coach the year before, and then I had an opportunity to take over the program and implement a lot of the different things that I learned as a coach. I coached at the pro level. I was a head coach. I was an assistant coach. I also played at the pro level. Was a college basketball player as well. And so I had a lot of opportunity to gain knowledge in the area where we're talking about defense. And so when I had the opportunity to coach in college, I was able to implement everything that I had learned at the pro level, everything that I had learned at the college level, playing, coaching. And this particular year was an amazing year. We were one of the top defensive teams in the country at the Division II level. And so with that, we're just going to dive into some things tonight. Thank you all who are tuning in, who are watching live, those who are watching after the fact. I hope you get something out of this. So we're just going to go into some defensive things and talk a little bit. And all of what I'm talking about is coming from my ebook entitled Defense Keys to Becoming a Top Defensive Team. And so we talk a lot about a lot of the things that are in my ebook. So after this course, it'll actually be down below where you can go and purchase. It's only $10, but there's a lot of knowledge in there, and I believe that you'll get some great things to help your team be a top defensive team. So we'll just go through a few things in the book here. When I open up the book, I really just talk about a lot about what I just told you guys in terms of just my defensive background and my history with defense. I talk a lot about how when I was a kid living in Cali, my dad used to take me to the Laker games, and I was able to watch Michael Cooper and Byron Scott and those guys, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And although they were Showtime Lakers, they had an emphasis on defense. And so, I really learned to play defense at a younger age. And I can remember my dad, sitting me down on the couch in Colton, California, and we would sit and go over game film right there. And I was only in the third grade. So I learned a lot of this stuff at a young age. And so to get past the intro of the book, I start talking about some of the things that I did as a coach defensively. So what helped me to be successful as a defensive coach is I taught statistical areas. So I would coach the statistical areas. All right. So if you're talking about steals, well, in order to get steals, you have to coach steals. You can't just assume that your players are going to just like to steal the ball. You have to teach them how to steal the ball, when to steal the ball. You have to teach them the importance of what a steal is. A lot of this came from me. I looked on the NCAA website, and on the NCAA website, there are different statistical categories. And in those statistical categories, you can see really what's important. So on there, they have a statistical category steals. Then they have a statistical category steals per game. Then they have another statistical category is turnovers forced. So these different areas, they have another statistical category, which I love more than a lot of them, is three-point field goal defense. Now, three-point field goal defense is your defensive tenacity to guard the three-point line, and in layman's terms, in my words, not let teams beat you from the three-point line. And so what that statistic talks about is the percentage that you are holding your opponent to from the three-point line. So that's another category. So when I began to look at these different categories, I found out that if I would coach these categories and help my team to be great at these categories, then what'll happen is we'll begin to put wins in the win column, because every time I looked at these different categories, you would see the national champion, they would be in this category. You would see several of the top teams in the country, they were in these defensive categories, and they were at the top of these defensive categories. So I was thinking, like, okay, if I just handle coaching these categories to make my team great in these categories, then we should have a pretty good record and we should rise up the rankings. And that's just what happened. And so that year we had a 23-6 record, and we were top 10 in several different categories in the nation. So we're going to go through some of those categories right here. The very first one that I would like to talk about, I talk a lot about the full court press, but I'm going to leave that to another session because my goal is to get on the whiteboard and begin to just draw some things up. So we're going to talk about steals per game. So in steals per game, now, the team that has the ball the most is normally the team that has a higher propensity to win. So steals per game, if we can take the ball from our opponent and give ourselves more of an opportunity to score, that's going to help us win. And so I couldn't assume that my players knew that. So I had to teach them steals. I had to teach them, one of the biggest things I had to teach them was how to do smart gambles. So how to gamble for the ball in a smart way. All right. So my preference on defense was always to play next pass denial. Okay. So we would always try to deny the next pass, but really we were trying to steal the next pass as well. And so what I had to do with our players was I had to show them how to steal the ball. I had to show them how to duck behind the eyesight or below the eyesight of the person that was passing, and then shoot the passing lane when the person has let go of the ball, and now they can't grab the ball back because the ball is out of their hand, and then here comes our player to take the ball. Now, what I liken steals to is shot attempts. So you know how you can go in the gym and you can shoot the ball and there's a shot attempt and you're putting up shot attempts because you're trying to increase your percentage from the field or from the three-point line or from the foul line. Well, in order to do that, you have to take shots. So in order to get steals, you have to allow your players to have steal attempts. You have to allow them to attempt to steal the ball, and you can't get mad at them for not getting a steal when they go for it, because it's going to happen. But one of the good things is that you can do is teach them how to shoot passing lanes so that they can go at it in a better way. So if one of my players was to go after 20 steals a game and they get 10, they were 50% on steal attempts. And so now with that, I have to continue to show them how to do it, and hopefully that'll get better. But I also have to show them that if they were to make an attempt to steal the ball and they missed, and then they went out of bounds or their momentum carried them past the play and they were out of the play, two things. We have to show them how to get back in the play and not shoot for a ball and miss it, and then next thing you know, they're in the locker room because they kept going or something like that. We can't allow them to do that. So we have to teach them to get right back into play. Another thing that we have to do is we also have to teach them, our team as a whole, how to rotate to help the man that may have went out of the play trying to get a pass or steal. And we have to show the defense how to rotate to cover that person. And then we have to show the person that went after the steal how to recover and maybe rotate back into defense in a place that was not the place that they were in to begin with. So those are just a couple things on the steals per game. But teaching your players how to do that, teaching your point guards how to sit below the level of the ball handler, how to get steals, how to use their hands to make the ball handler turn their back. All those things go into helping your team increase your number of steals per game. And so in this particular season, where we were one of the top defensive teams in the country, we were fifth in the nation in steals. So we averaged 13.8 steals per game. Now that's just flat steals, okay? So we're going to talk more about some of the statistics because it'll give you a better picture of some of the statistics that the NCAA tracks. So you have steals per game, you have turnovers forced. So turnovers forced, we averaged 25 turnovers a game. So you have forced turnovers, you have unforced turnovers, you have just steals, which that's another stat as well. So we'll kind of keep going and this will make sense to you. All right, so turnovers forced, okay? So with turnovers forced, this is more of a stat that is a more of an aggressive stat. And so with turnovers forced, we averaged 25 turnovers forced per game. So we were fourth in the nation in that stat. So when you're forcing turnovers, you're simply going at a team and saying, this is my ball and I'm going to get it. And so this may include steals. This may include a team, because of your defensive pressure, throwing the ball out of bounds. This may be you just playing defense and a team, a person dribbles it off their feet. It can mean a number of things, but when it results in a turnover for your opposing team, you get credit for that because of your defense. All right. So we were fourth in the nation in turnovers forced. And so with this, to increase this number, here's a couple things I'll talk about in my ebook. One of the first things is identify the opponent's source of turnovers. So to increase the turnovers for your opponent and your forced turnovers, there's unforced and forced. All right. So, but forced turnovers, you would like to identify your opponent's source of turnovers. So you might go into a scout and you might see an opponent that their point guard averages 7 turnovers a game. And so now you go to the film and you recognize that that point guard always turns it over off of pick and rolls. And so now you hammer in on that and you turn up your defense on the pick and roll. You turn up your pick and roll defense, and hopefully that'll result in turnovers from your opponent and will go to credit for you. Another area I'll talk about is focus on points off of turnovers. So you have to also focus on your points off of turnovers. It's not just taking the ball or stealing the ball. It's also converting off of that. So if you steal the ball 100 times, but you don't score off for any of those steals when you go down in transition offense or offense, as a result of your steal, then it's like you have high steal numbers, but what does it matter? So you have to focus on converting points off of turnovers. Okay. So I also talk about nothing is free. So you have to instill in your team that there is a nothing is free mindset. So case in point here, whenever you're playing defense and your team is playing defense and you're going down the court and you ever see players just kind of shuffle next to the player as they're dribbling the ball, I call that spectating, because you're not putting any pressure on the player. You're just kind of wasting energy and shuffling next to them. But when I realize that the basket that my opponent is trying to score on is really my basket, then that mindset is going to help me to be a little more aggressive and permit the offensive player that I'm defending to proceed down the court against me. So that's another mindset, that when you're talking about turnovers forced, as a defense, you're attacking the offense. And so that's another thing I kind of talk about in my book here. And then additional turnover helpers. So we talk about a lot of additional turnover helpers. Teams throw the ball away, they travel, they step out of bounds, but there's things defensively that you can do to increase the opportunities for them to do that. Pressure defense can, help another team turn the ball over. if you're full court pressing and you have a shot clock and you're taking time off the clock with the full court press, it causes the offense to speed up their offense. And a lot of times when teams have not practiced against a maybe a 20-second shot clock, although they have a 30, they haven't practiced a sped up offense. Then as you speed them up, they begin to make mistakes, and that can result in turnovers. Okay, so that's another area. Turnovers forced. I talk a lot about that in the book, but I'm just giving you guys a real overview. And then, hopefully in future sessions, we can go into this a little more. And if you decide to buy the ebook, 26 pages, really good read, you'll see that I go into really, really detail in these areas. So the next area I like to talk about is 3-point field goal defense. So that is like a pet peeve of mine because I used to thoroughly hate watching or being a team that gets beat from the 3-point line. Like, that is not something that is fun, because a lot of times when you see teams get beat from the 3-point line, they're not even playing any defense. They're not rotating on the ball, on the flight of the ball. They're not giving it an effort. And a lot of times opposing teams or offensive players, they're getting wide open shots. So I made it up in my mind that we were not going to get beat from the 3-point line. And so we really put a strong emphasis on rotating during the flight of the ball. And there were times that we would sit in practice, and if we didn't get it right, we would stay right there in practice. One of the things as coaches that you have to begin to grow the tenacity in is not allowing your schedule for practice or the pressure of players getting bored or anything like that move you off of the opportunity to stay at one place in practice until they get it right, and not moving on until they get it right. So there was a lot of times defensively where we would stay right there and we would not move until our players got that right. And a lot of times on the 3-point field goal defense and moving on the flight of the ball, we would do just that. We would stay right there. If somebody was sluggish and they were not moving, we'd go do it again and do it again. And so we really tried our best to perfect that. And so as a result of that, we were 27th in the nation in 3-point field goal defense. And so in my ebook, I break it down. I have the charts in the book and everything. And we allowed our opponents to shoot 27.7% from the 3-point line, which is pretty decent. We were 27th in the nation. And if you look at the top, the number one team in the nation in 3-point field goal defense was at 24.7. So they held their opponent to 24.7% from the 3-point line. So that race from we were 27th to number one, you're looking at about 3%. So it was a real close race for those top 30 teams. And so to hold your opponents to under 30% is pretty decent. And so we really try to do a good job at that, and we didn't allow teams to beat us from the 3-point line. So that was another one. So a couple more areas and then we'll be done. Just a little overview about defense and my ebook and just some of the areas that we really focused on. Post player defense. So alongside of me not allowing teams to beat us from the 3-point line, I never desire for teams to beat us from the paint either. And so my dad used to tell me when I was younger to not let a player just come down and set up and do whatever they like to do. He always said, make sure you push the player off the block or meet the player while they're coming down and don't let them get down to the block. And so when I was coaching Division I basketball, I was over the bigs. And so I was working with them on post positioning and meeting players as they come down the court. And so when one of my players was coming down court and they were meeting the offensive player, I said, make sure you meet and greet them. And it went off in my head and I said, I'm going to name this drill the meet and greet drill. And so with that, not only did I name the drill the meet and greet drill, excuse me, but I had a buddy, God rest his soul, Coach Mark Mitchell. He would allow me to come down to Ohio State and watch their practices and watch their individual workouts. And he would be training his daughter, Kelsey Mitchell. And so I got a chance to just sit in those sessions and just really learn all the things that he was teaching, not only his daughter, but the Ohio State players. And then I couldn't help but to notice that there was tape all over the court. And I was like, man, why does he got all this tape over the court? So he began to talk to me about how visually they would do certain things, and how the tape would be reminders or act as reminders to the players. And so I was in Division II at the time. So I didn't have a budget for tape. But when I got to Division I, we had a budget, and my office floor was like full of tape. I had boxes of tape in there. And so what I would do is I would take my red tape and I would put a line on the court, and I diagram it in my ebook on defense. I would put a line on the court, and with that line, the line would go from short corner to short corner, and it was about in the middle of the charge circle and the three-point line. So that was about 10 feet from the nail under the basket, 10 feet out in a circle going from short corner to short corner. So whenever my players would come down on defense, they didn't just go to the paint and just sit there and wait for the offensive player to come down. Our players would sit at that red semicircle about 10 feet out from the basket, and that's where they would meet the offensive player that they were guarding coming down the court. So when the offensive player was coming down the court, our players were 10 feet out meeting that player, and now that player had to fight to get positioning. Now, when a player comes down and they have to fight to get position, that's taking time off the clock. There's a shot clock in college. I heard there's a lot of places that's going to have shot clock in high school. I think some states do. And so when that player is fighting, there's one of two things that's going to happen. Either that player may be successful at fighting and get position, which is still taking time off the clock, or that player is going to give up the fight, and they're not even going to fight. They're just going to give up and divert to something else in the offense, which is a plus for us, because when they do that, now we've taken away or shaved percentages off of the opportunities that that player could have had to score in the paint. So if a player has 20 opportunities a game to score in the paint, just by us meeting that player 10 feet out, there's going to be a large percentage of times that that player is not going to get it in the paint because they gave up the fight, or we gave them enough of the fight to where the shot clock went down, and now the offense went another direction because the point guard couldn't get it to that post, or the wing couldn't get it to that post. They were defended, and so they went a different direction, and something else happened in the offense. So when you begin to think about those kind of things, this meet and greet drill will decrease your opponent's points in the paint. And I've seen it happen for us. It is very effective and it works. So I talk a lot about that in my ebook as well. And the chats are open too. So if you're on here and you have questions or anything, please go ahead and leave some comments or questions in the chat. And I have my 3 screens set up here. So I'm kind of looking at the screens as people talk or chat or anything like that. If you come on and you watch this even afterwards, I'll come back on and answer some questions as well. So make sure you comment any questions that you may have about anything that I'm talking about. All right, so now we have our last thing that I kind of want to talk about. The biggest thing when you're preparing your team to be a championship defensive team is conditioning. You cannot skip over the proper conditioning. This type of conditioning is not just sprints and different things like that. You have to be able to coordinate the different types of conditioning to fit your defensive scheme that you're planning on having for your season. So for us, we were a full court pressing team, and we pressed almost the entire game. So I like to say we're a 40-minute pressing team. We got close a lot of times. Of course, there's possessions where it doesn't happen or whatever the case, but most of the time we were full court pressing. So for me as a coach, being realistic, I can't assume that my team is just, hey, we're going full court press, and then that's the end of it. We give them the type of press, the 1-2-2 man, or whatever the case, 1-2-1-1. and then that's the end of the story, and then we just expect them to do it. Because here's the thing, what happens is you do that and your players don't have proper conditioning, and then we're going to wonder why they shy away from it, or they're not doing it when we're telling them, or players are blowing by them, or they're just breaking the press real easy. So I knew a lot of that. So I said, you know what, I have to train them properly. So the right way to train players when you're looking for them to not only press, stay in the game with energy, and not fatigue quickly, whether that's physical fatigue or mental fatigue, you have to train your teams both anaerobically and aerobically. So here's the breakdown. When you aerobic exercise is training or cardiovascular movement with breathing. So if you think about some of the things that you might do in conditioning, when you run the mile, that's aerobic because you're going to be breathing over time. Whereas anaerobic exercise is cardiovascular exercise that doesn't completely deal with breathing. So when you look at like a sprint down and back, you're not going to be too much depending on the breathing. Your breathing, your cardiovascular system, your breathing, because it's quick, it's boom, boom, down, back. You might breathe a few times, So, but if you train your players both ways, endurance training, sprint training is the layman terms, what it breaks down to. When you train them both ways, then when you're looking at a defensive team where you're looking for your players to have energy, to be out on the court, to stay out of fatigue mentally and well conditioned without falling prey to fatigue in their body, training aerobically and anaerobically is the best thing that you can do. I see a lot of teams that they just sprint. Well, that's good. But then what about those games where you're in foul trouble, your team's in foul trouble, and you need your starters on the court for the rest of the game and there's 8 minutes left? You have to be able to train both aerobically and anaerobically. So that's one of the things that is a big deal because you can't get around this and then have a championship defensive team. There's no way to do it. So your defensive scheme starts in the preseason. It really starts now. A lot of teams are already back training. There are some divisions, some teams that can't train in the summer. This is when you have to give your players workouts while they're at home. And of course, consult your athletic trainer or whatever the case, but they have to be doing something because by the time school starts, if they're not already doing some of the things that you're assigning them, it can almost be too late because, in college, the seasons start quick. And so if you got teams that have already been training all summer and then you train when school starts, there's a big gap between where they are and where you are. So you have to start thinking about your defensive strategy before the season starts. You have to start now. And so our players had summer workouts while they were at home. They had the mile times that they had to track. They had their sprint times that they had to track. They had their conditioning times on the football field or the longer runs. And so when they came back to school, we tested them on those things and we knew that our players were ready. And so when we were playing defense and they were shooting passing lanes and running all over the court, getting deflections and, a lot of the things that caused us to be one of the top defensive teams in the country with the stats that I read off to you guys, that stemmed from a foundation of great conditioning. Our teams never, ever cramped up. I can't remember one time one of our players cramped up. We did hydration tests. We made sure they were not only conditioned, but they had proper water levels and different things like that. So those are just some of the things far as a baseline that I went over today about defense and some of the things that, I encourage you to start thinking of as you build your championship team, and your defensive championship team for this year because, defense wins championships. And I have been a part of championships. I was a player, played in the MAC. We were a MAC championship team. We played great defense. Matter of fact, how I got on the court was because of defense, because I was a 6-foot guard. And then as a coach, as an assistant coach, we won a championship. This is my championship from Division II. And my ring rather, and then the year that we were 23-6 and we're one of the top defensive teams in the country. You know, we had a lot of great success that year, and that was when I was an acting head coach. So I just like to share these things with you guys. I hope this has helped someone. If it has, you can go ahead and give me a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, share this video with a friend, and we'll be doing more of these. So we hope that you guys are doing well. Go after it defensively. When you set the course of your team defensively and make that paramount in your program, I'm telling you, that will put everything else in place, and you'll see that you'll begin to win games. You'll begin to recruit different. The attitude of your program will be different, and I believe you'll do some great things this year. So if you got any questions, please shoot me a message on here in the chat. Leave a comment. I'll definitely answer, and we'll see you on the next one.